Hello. Hope everybody's day is going beautifully. I'm just making sure I'm getting everything set up and sent out. I might not be TikTok available very much longer. I am on warnings again, so just so you're aware, there's the backup account to follow, and there's also YouTube to follow, just in case you can no longer find me here on TikTok. Just because when you piss people off, you know how that goes. Just so you're aware. And I'm going to. Today, we're just going to talk a little bit on a couple of things that we touch on frequently, and a couple of things that move where. Why don't you move if you like capitalism? This land was not a capitalistic land. And I don't know why you would like something that makes you exploitable and tells you that it's okay for people to exploit you either. That to me is really weird. Like, okay, so if you don't like capitalism, get out. First of all, it's not your country, it's not your land. You don't get to tell me that, right? I don't reap any of the benefits of capitalism. I really don't. Like, you think I do, but I have lived dirt floor poor half of my life, and I tell you that it is better than the benefits of capitalism. One moment. I need to make a couple of adjustments. Okay. I'm not in the left. You might think I'm in the left, and I get that you would think that I'm in the left because I seem to disagree with you, but I'm not in the left. Really, the thing is I didn't really. I grew up within the continental United States, right, border wise, but I didn't actually like grow up in the thought process and the politic. I didn't go to a typical school most of the time. And I was really isolated when I wasn't among communities that aren't your standard United States communities. I was among indigenous communities when I wasn't isolated, but I was not among your standard communities. So, not only that, capitalism has never benefited me, and I would argue that it's probably never benefited you as well. I think that we believe capitalism is benefiting us because we are indoctrinated into this thought process that capitalism is benefiting us. But I think that when you have lived a life in a different manner, you are able to see that capitalism is not a benefit to you. I think that when you have looked at something in a manner that isn't drilled into your head as the only positive thing, and by a drilling into your head that is kind of a twisting of the reality of action, right? The reality that you see before you. Actions speak louder than words, right? We've all kind of, like been in that thought process, right? And we've all kind of been into a space where actions speak louder than word, where the thought processes that we have of what we're doing speaks louder than what we're saying, right? So if my thought process is to tell you that I love you all the time, verbally, and yet while I'm telling you I'm loving you, I'm hitting you, right? Then I convince you that my action of violence and pain against you is an action of love. And I twist in your mind and I twist in your reality the idea that love is violence, and therefore it's okay for people to hit you. If I spend my entire teaching of you, if I start from a young age and teach you things like, what you do for me is how I value your worth, then you spend somebody's formative years teaching them that they're an exploitable human being. And what they do for you is how you are going to value their worth. And if you teach somebody that worth is how you get love, how you get affection, how you get touch, how you get positive reinforcement, how you get any form of positive interaction, that you must be worthy to have that positive interaction, then we teach that what I can take from you is how I'm going to decide whether or not you deserve to be treated humanely. What I can take from you is how I decide whether or not I am going to treat you humanely. That is what that combination of what pretty much all of us have been taught under the current societal teachings teaches somebody. If I teach you that my value of you is only based on what I can take from you. If I teach a child that I only like them if they're cleaning the house, if I teach a child that I only value them and give them positive reinforcement if what they're doing brings me satisfaction, okay, brings me to a space that I want to be. If I teach a child that that's their only form of worth, right, is what I can exploit out of them. I had a belt on. Is what I can exploit out of them. Then I teach a child that if they're not doing things for me, if they're not being of benefit for me, then I don't value them. If I then teach that same child that the only way I will give that child love and affection is if I value that child, then I teach that child that positive reinforcement, the good things that they're going to get in life, are only measured on how I personally value them. While I am teaching them that how I personally value them is based on what I can take from them. Human life is valued just by breathing. If your belief is the thought process that you and I are only here to propagate the species, which is a weird thought process to start with, just so you're aware. But if you believe that you and I are only here to propagate the species, then you believe that the value of life is life itself. It is not what can be exploited out of it. So we are indoctrinated into a thought process that we should be exploitable for the people around us so that we can earn our worth, so that we can use that worth to be able to interact, to be able to feel valued, to be able to be given love. Okay. And you can respond to that in any way that you did. You go to, how do you believe the US was founded, Doodle? How do you believe the US was founded? The United States of America. What happened for that foundation? Like, what was the spark for that foundation? Do you know your history? because the spark for that foundation was taxation without representation. And there is nobody who represents me in the US government. Taxation without representation is what sparked the Revolutionary War, if you know your United States history. Just stating. I'm having a great day, Kat. Somewhat. I did a video. My brain, like TikTok, is weird. But anyways, when we are training our people, we are training our children, when we are interacting on a level where we teach that worth is only based on whether or not you are doing something for me. I only value you if you are doing something for me. We're teaching antithesis to who we are and antithesis to several other thoughts that we teach. So many people believe that our thought process here are why we are here is to propagate our species. Some people think that we're locusts spread across this planet. Some people think that it was given to us as a gift, right? Some people think that this deep purpose that we have has to do with some divine intervention, right? But most people have this shared thought process that we're supposed to create more of us. We're supposed to make it bigger. We're supposed to have more, right? This shared thought process that we're supposed to have more of our species and that we are here to propagate, right? So when we are looking at this shared propagation that we believe that we have, this need to continue ourselves as a species that we believe that we have, then every human being is valued just by breathing. Every human being is valued just by being alive. When you take the thought process that we have in today's world that we were just discussing about as a child being taught that your worth is based on whether or not I can exploit you, and whether or not I find you worthy is whether or not I give you positive reinforcement. And then as we're thinking that our value is this, what can be exploited out of us, we're also thinking our value is the continuation of the species. And we're also thinking that we have what we call a right to life, that this is one of our inalienable rights, right? This means that this right is inherent within us as a being, right? So with all of this, paying people an honest dollar for an honest day's work is absolutely not exploitation. Exploitation is looking at somebody and only valuing them on what you think that they can do for you. If I am trading you value for value, then I'm not exploiting you. I'm respecting you. But if I am trading you value for crumb, honest, real value for gone, then I am not respecting you. I am exploiting you. And when we teach children that their worth is based on what they give to us, not on the simple act that we love them because they're there, but based on what we give to, what we get from them, what we can get from them. When you tell anybody that their only value is what you can take from them, what you can get from them, what they're willing to give up to you for nothing, then we teach children that it is okay to be exploitable, because we are teaching children that their only value is what can be taken from them. Which again is what exploitation is. Because if it is a fair and honest trade, then it is not exploitation. And your worth should not be valued on what you can give, on what you do. Now, that doesn't mean that if you are somebody who does a lot for community or somebody who does a lot You shouldn't have more value, yet we are all value just by being here if value is species propagation. This is a logical statement. A logical statement. I can repeat it again. When you teach a child that the only time you will give them love is when they are doing something for you, then you teach a child that their only worth is if they are doing something for you. Okay? If you teach a child that their only worth is when they're doing something for you, then you teach them to constantly be doing something for everybody fucking else without anything in return. That to earn their worth, they must be doing something for somebody without anything in return. Okay. Auntie, that is so, I don't even know which racism rant you're on. I don't even know what racism rant you're on, sweetheart. But race theory has been debunked. Race does not exist. It is a colonial construct, and it is meant to keep you in check so those that rule you can exploit you. So, when you are dealing with a thought process that teaches you that your value is based on whether or not you are able to be exploited, able to be taken advantage of, able to or desirous of giving everything you are for nothing in return, then you become exploitable by a capitalistic society, because money or capital is something that is made up. It's arbitrary. It doesn't really exist. It doesn't really exist. It's a piece of it's a couple different fibers mixed together. One of them is a plant fiber, one of them is another plant fiber. They all make this fabricy fibery thing, and they print it. It is made up. Somebody prints it. Somebody prints it. It is nothing. It is air. It is arbitrary, and its value is set by people who have no concept of what it is to live without. Right? So when you are sitting there and looking at capitalism as a positive, and you're sitting there and you're telling me that it's a positive that we all live under capitalism, I'm telling you that you haven't logically thought out this idea. I'm telling you that you haven't looked deep enough. And that's okay. Many of us don't until we're older or wiser or willing. Many of us are taught not to hear anything other than what we've been indoctrinated to. Right? It's absolutely why so many different countries are laughing at us. Because when we have so many different countries out there laughing at the fact that we're not taking care of our community, that we're not civilized, that the things that we're number one in is maternal mortality rate for an industrialized world and mass incarceration. When we're looking at those things, when our education is 43rd to 46th on the list and not number one, when our military isn't even fucking up there anymore. As a war vet, I can say that, right? When you're looking at those concepts, the rest of the world is absolutely laughing at us. And they've been laughing at us for a long fucking time. That's why yesterday, when everybody was all like, people cheered over 9/11, that was not okay. I'm sitting here going, yeah, why not? Paid for it ourselves. Not only that, we trained it ourselves. Not only that, we deserved it, right? So when we're looking at the idea that we have taught ourselves and taught our society and taught our children that we are able to, that our only worth and our only value is what can be taken from us, right? We end up with the ability for a government to steal from you. Now, people like to think that the idea of capitalism is only a few hundred years old, right? Just like they like to think that the idea of communism and fascism is only a few hundred years old. Now, we are around for 300,000 years as a species. The oldest of our species is found in Morocco in Africa that is 300,000 years old, right? We are around for at least 300,000 years as a species. In 300,000 years, it's not till 10,000 years ago that we see the rise of violence as a species. We do not see any rise of violence in any of the prior species. So at 300,000 years, or from 300,000 years to 10,000 years ago, there is no evidence that is definitive of violence in the archaeological record. There is no thought process that we were actually killing each other off. Okay? And there is this rise at 10,000 years ago. And this rise at 10,000 years ago, this is where we start to see possession, ownership of land, and we start to see narcissistic god kings founding cities, these cities built on monocrop agriculture. We start to see with these cities built on monocrop agriculture that this idea is founded. I've stood on 3 front lines, motherfucker, come at me. I mean, don't play me like that. Don't threaten me in my chat. That's the thing right there, because that's what that is. I don't need no man. Two spirit, first of all, two spirit, and I'll outman you any day, because all the things your patriot ass aspires to, dreams of, video games doing, are things that I have done in this world, and ain't a single person that could take me down without losing a part of themselves. So do not think to come at me like that. Don't need no man. And the one I live with is a fucking MMA champion. So don't even think, motherfucker. Because strong women go for strong fucking men. So you can think I ain't. But you've got pictures of me and you've seen them. You just don't know it's me because masks, dude. Just saying. You got pictures of me and you ain't even seen them. You just don't know it because it's masks. When we see the rise of Western-based agriculture-formed cities that are founded by and controlled by narcissistic god kings, we see that this rise of violence is associated with this, is where we start to see this idea that you can belong to something or belong to someone instead of belonging to the land or instead of belonging to self. When we start to see this idea that ownership of land translates into ownership of people. So in this time frame, we also start to see this thought process and concept of hoarding. People will tell you that civilization means, or this is at least what professors will tell you, that civilization means reaching a point where you have an abundance of food. I would state that this does not go far enough. Civilization means reaching a state where you have enough food that you can feed your masses and no one ever starves. That is civilized, because civilized has compassion and empathy. Civilized is compassion and empathy. Civilized is not having enough food that you can hoard it. Civilized is never hoarding and having enough that you can feed everyone. That is what civilization is. So we see that this thought process of ownership of land and translating to this thought process of ownership of people, translating to this thought process of hoarding grain, hoarding food, and using what we call othering to create this army to protect your hoarding of your food, right? Using this army to protect your hoarding of your food. And so we use this army to protect hoarding of food by telling people not to fear the army, not to fear the king, but to fear their neighbor. Now, this doesn't start as your neighbor. It's a slow roll of manipulation. It starts the barbarians in the hills are going to steal your grain, right? It starts 10,000 years ago with this foundation moment of what we term as Western civilization. And when it starts 10,000 years ago with this foundational moment of what we term as Western civilization, we see that this start of othering occurs. And the start of othering that it occurs at this point of time is, again, barbarians in the hill are going to steal your grain. So you have to pay me so that I can pay the army to protect you from the barbarians in the hills in your grain so that I can hoard it, so that I can keep it away. And we become civilized because that's civilization. Now, the idea of the barbarians in the hills translates into that other nation is not as great as us when all people are living in what they think of as cities in the area, right? And then it translates down into the idea of othering based on the idea that those of a different gender are weaker. And because those of a different gender are weaker, they must be treated as inferior and they can be owned. Now we see this starting before we see othering based on religion, which comes next. And othering based on religion teaches you that another religion is a sin, that another religion is creating genocide, that another religion is harming people, that another religion is the problem. And when we see that thought process of othering based on religion starting and rising, we see the rise of monotheistic religions rising. So we get to a point that in the early 1400s, we start to see this thought process and idea that there is a thought outside of God, not that God, like this thought process that it's okay to question God in a European mindset because all other spaces in the world have been able to do this, including like Islam, which is questioning of God and performs science and performs medicine. Christian-based Europe can't perform science, can't perform medicine. This is against God. So we see that this thought process rises that you can start questioning things. And then we see that there is the questioning that leads to the attack of Europeans on the Arawak or Taino people in 1492. And we see that this othering based on this idea that manifest destiny has developed out of the Catholic Church, stating that anybody who does not follow the religion stated by the Catholic Church is able to be murdered and their space is taken because of the fact that they need to be brought to God and God has given them that land. And we see that with manifest destiny with the attack within Abiyala, because the Arab people are in the South American region, and South America's Abiyala. And that formation of manifest destiny that before was based on an idea of sin changes from an idea of it being sinful because of another religion when the Europeans see a people who are so truly civilized, who have no disease really, who have an abundance of food that feeds their elders and feeds their orphans, and no one is houseless and no one starves on the street, and loving and caring for each other. And so when they see this, they call these people the children of God, las de los indios. And the reasoning that they call them the children of God is because they are so pure in their thought process, they must be close to God. And in the way they care for their people, they must be close to God. So we see that you can no longer make it at this point about a difference between religion. Now you must make it about something else. And this idea of race forms a colonial construct. And so when the idea of race forms, this is our next step in othering. Now, all along the way, you must realize that what I can take from you is really why I am creating this idea for you to other. The reason I need you to hate anybody but me is because if you hate me, there's more of you than me. There has to be, so that I can hoard your shit. And since there's more of you than me, again, there has to be, so I can hoard your shit. You can overthrow me if you get it in your idea, right? If you understand what is going on, you can overthrow me. So I must keep you living in fear of your next door neighbor instead of I who is exploiting you. Again, this foundation of exploitation. Again, this idea of capital. This idea that your value is based on what you can provide for me. Your worth is only based on what you can provide for me. So within, hey everybody, I'm sorry. I am trying to ignore the comments. There are some, and for some reason, the ones that shouldn't be coming through are coming through kind of grayed out, right? So like, I'm okay with it, and I'm really ignoring. So if I've missed you guys coming in, I do apologize. So when you see this thought process that your worth is not based on being alive, your worth is not based on being human, your worth is instead based on whether or not I can steal from you, whether or not I can deceive you, whether or not I can take from you so that I can hoard from you. And the ability to do this is othering, and it has caused this rise of violence. We see that it has moved from the barbarians in the hills all the way through the colonial construct of race. Race becomes a theory scientifically in the 1850s. And it becomes a theory scientifically when there is this thought process that there are other species, and then therefore the Bible is not the be all and end all, and maybe something else exists. Okay. As race becomes this idea, this last form of othering, it really spreads. And so many different countries, especially so many countries in the Western Hemisphere, so many countries founded by the invaders of Abiyala and Turtle Island, are founded on this construct of race. Everything about them is on this construct of race, and they, without a shadow of a doubt, in the documented, at least, worst atrocities throughout our humanity, use and need this theory of othering and this theory of race to perform the horrific exploitation of human that is here. The taking of the land, the genociding of a people, the taking of a people from a land, and the genociding attempt of that people, while trying to not, right? Like the issues and exploitation of humanity that is found in the Western Hemisphere after 1492 is the worst documented in any of history. And I would state that we don't have documentations of the prehistory of it. I would state that we haven't seen anything like it. So, of course, when understanding starts, and one of the effects of colonialism is intermixing of race, okay? One of the effects of colonialism is intermixing of communities. This is the side effect of grape. I don't know why you would think logically anything different. If you sexually assault women, that's what happens, is children who are of two different communities, right? So one of the results of colonialism is mixing. And this is why we call ourselves a melting pot. It's not because we're, living like this and like this and like this and like this. It's because we're living like this. Okay. And when we are looking at the side effect of that, we have to see that race starts not playing well anyways, because you can't decide somebody's ethnicity or their genotype based on phenotype. Never more so than now. So when we see this movement into this, space where there's so much interconnectedness, right? And race is the foundational structure of a country. We have to move our game of othering. And we move our game of othering to immigrants, right? Joe Biden is a shithead. I'm telling you to overthrow the government, not to vote for somebody else. So, um, when we see this translation of othering down through race, because we start to be so mixed that race doesn't count as much anymore. Now, do not get me wrong, that does not mean that racism is not horrific throughout the United States, Canada, most of the world. That does not on any level mean that I do not see and know and am adamantly against the racial structure that has been the social structure of the United States and Canada and Mexico that has enforced trauma upon trauma upon trauma on people. It is absolutely still ongoing, right? What it means is as you and I stop caring as much, they have to find something else to make us care about. Okay. It means when you and I start to see each other as human, because we're too intermixed to see anything else, they have to get us to care about something else. Immigration has always kind of been there as a background of othering, but not as necessarily as much. And so immigration starts to the rise, right? And immigration starting to the rise, we see capitalism throughout all of this, right? We see the idea that capital is built on the backs of man. So many of our philosophers speak of this, right? Capital is built on the back of man, right? And when you're trading your capital for something ethereal, ephemeral, whatever that, wispy, nothing. You're trading your blood, sweat, and tears. You're trading everything you are for something that poofs in the wind at any point of time. They can take your house, right? They can come up and take your house. It's called eminent domain. It's not like anything you own or anything you have or anything you feel belongs to you truly belongs to you, right? So when capital is your worth, everything that makes you you, being able to be taken for something that can go in the wind, you see capitalism, your capital being exploited, is continuing through and creates with the hoarding of goods the houseless problem, right? Where people have been exploited for everything they're worth and are no longer able to be exploitable. So they're no longer able to trade their exploitable value for wispy pieces of in the wind so that they can have a house to live in, right? So it's saying I'm not the owner of the product of my labor because it's gone, right? So when we see that, logic tells you that capitalism has been here for 10,000 years, that capitalism is founded on the need to hoard from you, that capitalism trades everything of value about you for something it can poof in the wind tomorrow, and owns you in its own mind, and and has manipulated you into thinking that it is not it that is devaluing your life, but it is somehow your next door neighbor. And when it is done taking everything from you, it leaves you nothing, nothing except that which is spit on and kicked on by those working so hard to reach the point of nothing. So when you talk to me about capitalism giving you positive, I can't point out positive for you. Now, can I point out positive for you in things like industrialization? Nah, it depends. Western based agriculture is horrific. And there are way better ways of agriculture, always have been. But Western based agriculture is as much about control of the land as it is about control of the people. And it is hoarding, right? When it is done on a governmental scale, especially in a space and a time where we throw out half of it, let it mold instead of giving it to people, right? I'm not a socialist either. And see, that's the biggest problem because everything has been based on capitalism this entire time, but you guys haven't been calling it capitalism. You've been calling it monarchy. You've been calling it dynasty. You've been calling it fascism. You've been calling it communism. You've been calling it socialism. You've been calling it everything but capitalism, but it's capitalism and it's been capitalism the whole time because every single bit of it is based on what you are doing physically, actively for somebody or something else, right? I agree. The ownership of property is not acceptable. I don't believe we should own land. The land is a living, breathing being. Why do you think that you can own any living, breathing being? We belong to the land. The land does not belong to us. I believe that we should provide better care for the land that we belong to because we are certainly not. Any level of hoarding is hoarding. You already have, George. You've already walked into my house and stayed, and you turned it into a hellhole. So, and it's not like I own it anyways. Even if I actually owned it, right? Even if I actually like on paper owned it, it's not like you can actually keep it if you own it. The government can walk into your house today and take it. And if you're not aware, you're not aware of the law. Eminent, 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 eminent domain, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce it for the next 5 minutes at least, is a provision that states that they can come in and take it from you anytime they want, to put a freeway through it, to give it to somebody else. Right? The problem is the idea that you're exploitable. And you can believe you're exploitable. If you want to believe that you're exploitable, if you want to believe that your only worth is what can be exploited out of you, that's fine. That's a very fatalistic and self devaluing belief system. But you're welcome to believe, you're welcome to devalue yourself like that. You're welcome to devalue yourself like that. I would state that it is your devaluing of yourself like that, and so many people's devaluing of themselves like that, that creates the vast majority of mental health issues for men, right? There is this idea that your only worth is what can be exploited out of you, and this idea that you can't be exploitable. These are very conflicting, right? And this idea that you have to provide for your family, and yet this idea that you're also supposed to do this in a way that's not usually very provision for your family. And you're supposed to do all of this working extremely hard to be exploitable, which you're not supposed to be exploitable, right? So for so many men, there is a lot of mental health issue, a lot of pain, a lot of depression. This is why this unaliving rates for young men are so high, because this prospect of being unable to be exploitable, when being exploitable is the only way that you can prove any worth, have anybody love you. It's the only way you deserve a wife. It's the only way you deserve children. It's the only way that you deserve anything out of life. It's the only way you deserve to be safe. It's the only way that you deserve to be functional and feasible. Right. So if you are taught that the only way you deserve to be functional and feasible is if you're exploitable, well, you're being taught that you shouldn't be exploitable. If you're taught that your only worth is what you can provide, well, being taught that you can't provide, or actually just seeing the reality that you can't provide, right? And they probably won't, right? So when you look at it from a logical standpoint, look at it from sometimes I just want to say when you just open your eyes, right? When you just open your eyes, then I don't mean to state it as if there's something wrong with you for being blind, and I don't want it to come across like that. But the reality is sometimes if you just open your eyes, how can you be taught compassion is the right way to be? At the same time, being taught it's okay to put spikes on the street so homeless can't sleep, right? How can you conflate two opposing viewpoints as the same positive in your brain, right? There's no way to conflate the two opposing viewpoints as a positive in your brain and not be gaslit and feel gaslit and half crazy, which means that there is this mental trauma going on because you're being told that reality isn't reality. And while you're being told that reality isn't reality, you're reacting to the fact that reality isn't reality, you know? So yeah, well, you're sitting there going, oh, you just want to be capital or communist, or capitalism has done all of these things for me, or, you know, all of these things that are absolutely ridiculous, right? None of the things that you have are giving you satisfaction, really. That's why you need more all the time, right? If you are based on this idea of capitalism, if capitalism is the positive to you, then the idea is how much can I possess? There's never ever on this planet enough to possess, and if billionaires can't prove that, then nothing can. There are people in this world who possess so much that their 10,000th generation grandchild will not want. They could never spend it all in 10 generations, right? Even if they blew it, right? They have that much money and it's still not enough. And you can't see that you're never going to have enough if having enough is the thing, right? So when you're looking at the thought process from the perspective of worth is based on exploitation, and what I can be exploited for is how anybody is going to see me, that is the positive in life, that lack of compassion is in fact compassion, right? And you're mixing all of that shit together, this indoctrination, this sinking into your brain from childhood is what you are dealing with. You're not dealing with what your brain would tell you if you were listening, right? I'm not a cult. That's cute. And I've been accused of that, but I'm not a cult. I'm not a cult because I'm not looking for people to worship me or follow me, and I'm not looking for money. So, not really. I would like people to see what 40 years of study has taught me, right? I would like people to see what 40 years of study on this subject has taught me. Yet, and I do believe that by seeing it, you can affect change, right? But this isn't stuff that I discovered out of the blue or God taught me. This is stuff that other teachers taught me. This is stuff that elders taught me. This is stuff that learning taught me. This is stuff that closing my mouth and opening my ears taught me. And I'm just sharing it. Right? When you don't have a soul, all you have is materialism because you don't understand. And I think that that is a very true statement. I think that some people are taught that I think it's that gaslight, right? Like I'm starting to see it. Well, not even starting to see it. I'm starting to name it as because I've seen it, but I'm starting to realize, okay, that's gaslighting. That's exactly what that is because I've been going, well, how is this shift of reality playing out in people's mind, right? Like, I think it started when I was way younger and I was like, how could you give us such a great gift and then call it a sin? And anytime we did anything having to do with it, and it's how we procreate. And anytime we had anything having to do with it, you were going to hate us and smite us for it. Like, why would you do that? That's just really wrong. And that's just kind of icky, right? So I think I started to see the twist of it then, but I didn't understand it as the term gaslighting. But as I'm coming to a point of understanding it and understanding a lot of terminology, I'm realizing that that's exactly what that is. Telling you that you're supposed to be compassionate while you're committing uncompassionate acts, right? That you're supposed to be compassionate. Yeah, and some are, and there are, I think there's only like one or two in here right now. Um, there's two in here right now. Um, that level of I have like 30 and they're maxed out. I had to get rid of some yesterday and add new ones in. um, but when we're looking at a concept of only having a few different people, right? Like, or not, sorry, my brain scrolled because of mods. When we're looking at this concept, so it's a nominal teaching of, and I learned this as a child, and I unfortunately taught this to my first child. Okay. Um, Parents spanking their children because they love them, right? A child being taught, I only spank you because I love you, which in the parent's mind, as a parent, what was in my mind was I need to make this child actually understand what they need to do to fit into society, right? And so this is what I've been taught that I'm supposed to do to make them understand what they need to do to fit into society because I need to raise responsible people for society, right? Great thought process still to this day, I think. But, I think that there's other things that we can do. So when we are teaching that we spank because we love them, we're teaching that this physical violence is due to love. We're teaching that it's okay to be violent, right? We're teaching that it's okay for somebody else to be violent to us. I had to go and apologize to my daughter once I realized this because what I realized is that I taught her that when somebody hits her, that means they love her. How set up for abuse can you get, right? So when we are looking at the idea, I'm kind of ignoring the comments pretty well. So if it gets bad, I do apologize. Um, if you like at me, it will blink at me or something like that, and I can actually no. If you pin it, it will work. Sorry, should not have. Uh, but when we are looking at this thought process, that if we are loved by somebody, that somebody is going to punish us, right? Then we go into a thought process of pretty much every relationship we have is abusive, right? This is why most corporations are able to get away with the vast amounts of abuse that they are. When we're taught that something is normal and okay, then we're taught that we should accept it. And when we're taught we should accept it, people are doing it to us. We just go, and it takes some of them a minute, Steve. It really does. Yeah, actually. But it is okay. I mean, and the thing is everybody's answers and my answers has a tendency to teach just as much, right? Like the conversations that happen in chat teach just as much as the converse is the words that I'm stating. And so much different information comes out within them, right? Oh, you need to take your God out my chat. We don't deal with your God in my chat. Your deity is a narcissist and I don't like him. Can you take him away, please? That's a boundary I'm setting. Some people will never open their eyes. And I think a big part of that is that fear, right? I mentioned yesterday in chat, and I've mentioned before, most people don't understand courage as, most people think of it as an absence of fear. Most people don't understand courage as a presence of fear and standing up anyways, because that's what you have to do, right? So most people think of the idea of people that they see that are brave and courageous. They think that they just have no fear. And so they're out there just being brave and courageous, right? Um, Instead of realizing that that would just be sociopathy, right? If you had no fear, you're kind of a sociopath. That people who are brave and courageous actually are terrified through their bravery and their courage. yet they can't do anything else. That's what courage is. Otherwise, it's not courage. It's not courage if you're not afraid. It's not courageous if you're not going, shit, is it going to work? Right? Like, am I going to make it through? There's nothing courageous about it if it's not, you know, that thought process that you might not make it and that fear in it. Right. So, um, for many people, the idea of facing what they benefit from or what has been done in their name or what they have to deal with is extremely traumatic, and they don't have the courage. They're afraid. They're afraid, you know. And they're afraid that if they have to look at the things that they might have done or the things that they might have caused, and by looking at that they can't handle themselves. Instead of understanding that it is through accountability, that we actually are able to understand and have compassion for ourselves, right? That we are able to, make change in self and to develop and grow. Can't catch your pearls, just fine. Just a little bit. Yeah. Be until you're meaningless. Well, and there's so many different levels of society that do that to us today, right? So many different levels of this indoctrination. Not all of this is indoctrinating by our parents. Some of this is indoctrinating by our religious groups. Some of this is indoctrinating in the school. Some of it's indoctrinating on the TV. Some of it's indoctrinating by the government. It's all the different like levels of this indoctrination that, devalue you in every step of the way, so you learn to devalue yourself, right? So that you're constantly striving to be of value for other people, because if you're constantly striving to be of value for other people, then you are able to be exploited easier, right? You don't value yourself enough to value your time, right? So if I don't value I see this in creators a lot, where you see somebody who, doesn't value that, they need to recover the cost of the item that they made, plus they need to recover their time at a reasonable rate, right? So you see this lack of value of self. And so you're willing to trade value for less, trade value for less, trade value for less, right? And when we get to this point that we're, so devaluing of self, so able to see our own worth just on breathing, just on being alive, just by being here, right? Then we are able to, not we're able to, we're terrified that, we have to perform these acts so that we can actually still be alive, right? Which is not a level of safety, which is not a level of, capability to, actually have any form of stability, right? So when we see that this constant indoctrination of the devaluation of self based on anything other than what can be exploited out of you for arbitrary amounts, this constant devaluation bleeds into your soul. It's not only who you see yourself as, but it's who you teach your children to see themselves as. It's how it vibrates through every level of it, right? um when we're looking at value as a human, as a person, right, that then becomes the other question. Because if we are set here and taught, well, your value is this and your value is that, right? How did we reach a point thought process that we can understand that value is breathing, value is life, value is existing, right? So when we are looking at the thought process of socio-religious society standards, right, we see that there is this thought process that our purpose here as humans is that we're a gift, or that we were gifted this, right? We were made to be given this, right? If you're looking at a religious aspect, if you're looking at it in an aspect of evolution without understanding evolution fully. Oftentimes, you look at it as we're a master species who is here to propagate, who, or if you look at it as a biological factor instead of looking at the actual biology of it, you might look at it or look at it as a biological factor without looking at the actual biology of it. You might look at it as its species propagation. All of these things are about more of us, right? Whether it's the religious standpoint of how many more can you have so that God's followers are there, or whether it's a species propagation standpoint of either an evolutionary thought process that doesn't understand the fullness of it, or a biological thought process that doesn't understand the fullness of it. It is all about species propagation. And I would argue with all of that that yes, it is important to have species continuation. I would not state that it is important to have species propagation, right? Um, and the reason that I would state that is because when we're looking at species continuation versus species propagation, what we're looking at is the ability to sustain our species life. No species sustainability is about the individual, right? God doesn't care that your line lives on. God doesn't care that you have a baby. God cares that there are babies out there to worship him. The species doesn't care if it's about the biological propagation of the species. The species doesn't care that your line lives on. The species doesn't care whether you have sex. The species cares whether or not the species as a whole carries on, right? That the species as a whole is able to become and stay and sustain and maintain. Now, this is just if you're looking at it through a surface level or looking at it through a religious standpoint, a surface level scientific species standpoint or a religious standpoint. When you look deeper into an evolutionary standpoint, you look at why. Nothing evolves in a vacuum. Everything evolves based on adaptation for space, and everything evolves to adapt to fulfill a niche within space. Everything around you evolved to create and fulfill a niche within space. Whether it is the roots of the plant that form the tightness of the soil so that all the different little creatures can move around underneath the soil, that performs a more loosening effect that nurtures and fertilizes the roots of the plant. Whether it's the tree whose web creates vast forest nations with matriarchal clans that all communicate with each other and creates oxygen, right? Creates the ability for us to breathe better and also provides so many different things for us, from medicinal products to housing, right? So every different thing fulfills a niche within the environment. To think that we were not evolved to fulfill a niche within the environment would be a very egotistical thought process and would be socio-religious or religious thought process, right? So as we're looking at this thought process, that is our evolutionary space, that we evolved in a vacuum. This can't happen anyways, evolved in a vacuum, and that we don't have a niche to fulfill within this space, then you fail to see that the niche that we fulfill within this space is a niche based on our ability to adapt our adaptations. Throughout philosophy in school, throughout many different times in my life, I've had people go, well, what do you think separates humanity from everything else? And my answer has been many and varied. I don't know, right? Though, as I've studied anthropology, I would state that the one thing that makes us different than the other species still here, though not different than our predecessors, would be a thought process of adapting our adaptations. Other species have compassion. Other species have empathy. Other species can build homes. Other species can adapt their environments. Other species can create tools. Other species can do many of these different things. We take our adaptations and adapt them further. And in taking our adaptations and adapting our adaptations further, that furthering of our adaptations creates a change that nurtures the earth, right? And this is the niche that we fulfill. So, in our ability to take tools and change the way that the tools work, we're able to create a more nurturing environment for the earth by harvest, by taking the older of the food animals, like taking the old deer, and things like that. We're able to prune for society. We're able in our getting us our needs met to do what many different cultures name many different things. Though for me, it'll always be honorable harvest. Take just what we need at the time that the plant or the animal needs it to happen so that we can provide for ourselves and provide tending to the environment. And the way that our adaptations are gives us the ability to do this in a more ecological manner for the environment over time. Sometimes we get off track. We've been off track, right? So when we are looking at an evolutionary standpoint of why we are here and what makes us different, we are able to adapt our adaptations, and we are here to tend to nurture the environment, to help the animals and the plants in the environment to grow in a better way, using our adaptations, using our brains, right? We recently discovered that Neanderthals were just as smart as we were, right? And that's been a long time, like, ha, 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 right? And they lived 600,000 years. I would argue that prior species were probably as advanced as we are now in so many ways. I don't know whether or not they had phones and video cameras. I will grant you that. I will state that in 2 million years, is your phone going to be this? And I will state that we're finding more and more information about things that we never imagined they could have, that they did have as time moves on. So I would state that there is a more ecological interaction with the advancement that blends back in much better ways. I think we are, Vanessa, but I think it's only about 10,000 years old. And I think that if we can translate our thought process on it, we can translate it, right? If we can see, we changed our thought process to get here, right? And it's so little of a time period in our timeline as humans. We're 300,000 years old, and it is a 10,000 year period. It's an eyelash, it's a pinky finger, it's nothing. We can absolutely adapt it, change it. And in some spaces, it's less than 100 years old. And in some spaces, it hasn't even happened, right? In some spaces, it's still not there yet. So we can absolutely change that thought process. So when you look at us from an evolutionary standpoint, the reason we are here is to fulfill a niche, like everything else. This is a logical thought process. It is, if you open your eyes, a logical thought process. If you ask yourself why a species is created, they're created to fill a niche. That's what science tells us. That's a common ancestor. I could probably ask most children, why are species created? They do something for the world around them, right? So when we look at this from the evolutionary standpoint, that's where we stand. That does not mean we're here to propagate. That means we're here to tend. It means that we must maintain a species' health so that we can provide that tending, but it does not mean we're here to have as many babies as we can, right? I believe everything has a soul. I believe the trees have a soul. I believe my dog has a soul. I believe everything has a soul. that the world has a soul, that the earth is a soul in and of herself, right? And I believe that soul is energy. And I believe that we are all living in kind of a part of me is a matrix. Part of me thinks we're just a giant ball of energy that's created this. Uh, Part of me believes that it's all as physical as it is. It's kind of a so. Um, well, naturally, we use population control. We've always used population control naturally. We don't right now, but we have in history. Um, Most population control, though, is about propagation control, uh, not about like getting rid of people, right? But it's about propagation control, not propagating too many, right? Most population control is about that. Um, we like to think of population control as like, killing off great measures of people, but that's not really real. A population control in a natural way is control of births, amount of births, and it's control of a or it can be disease, right? Uh, and it can be like environmental shifts, environmental changes for population control happen naturally, right? For really every species, right? Um, well, considering what is going on right now in the world, they know it from both sides. And I come from a people who faced a horrific genocide. So I know what population control is from that side. Thank you very much. Who are still facing a horrific genocide. And if you are unaware of the genocide ongoing under the United States government, then I suggest you get educated. So, so what is okay? So Boyle, conscious population control is herbology, which is absolutely something that we've had early on and absolutely something that you can absolutely see in some other species. Other species of primates are known to use herbs to kind of like prevent birth, right? There's also the fact that in other species, there is a spacing of children that is supposed to happen within our species that we've counteracted. But the spacing of children that is natural population control, right? Do I see examples of other populations genociding other groups? Absolutely not, which would support my argument that this violence within us is only 10,000 years old and is created by the narcissistic need to hoard. The lack of horror in other species absolutely only proves my words true that this is you being manipulated and used. This is you being manipulated and used. And it goes back 10,000 years. And it's so people can steal from you. And it's not who you think, because your neighbor isn't trying to steal from you. It's your government. It's the people who want to be in charge and in control. It's not natural to want to be in control of other people. It's not a biological, natural thing to any species. Already did. Had to think about it. That's what ADD does. But, this trip is definitely like government created. All my medicine is government paid for, just like all of my health care and all of my mental health, because the government did this shit. So, Um, you think many species have leadership roles. Name me a species that actually has a leadership role of anything other than a family matriarch or patriarch. Just a species. One species where you see any form. That's just the matriarch. Answer just a matriarch. Same with bees. That's a matriarch. Oh, I didn't see it, Stephen. I'm sorry. Oh, beavers. Oh, yeah, definitely the population part. So that is from an evolutionary standpoint. When we look at it from a biological standpoint, we get to a different standpoint. The idea again that we are here to propagate a species, right? No. So it's not a form of hierarchy outside of a family. And that is my point. So within a family, people respect or disrespect their parents, right? Their mother, and often their mother's mother, right? Which is what a matriarch elephant family is, because those are like clans. They're not like different nations. They're a family, right? So there's no well, they asked if they said that uh I think they asked if there was any other species that had leadership or something like that. But yeah, no, it's not semantic. Gorillas are a father with all of his wives and children. It's not semantic, and the reason is because let's go back to the question. Okay, first it was one species that limits its population, which we talked about. Okay, so many species have leadership roles. Okay, I will grant you that. You were asking about kings, though, at some point, or rulers. You said rulers. This is a difference. So, being the leader of a family, which is what I said, is different than being the leader of a city or a nation or a group of people. Why? Because of the fact that when you have a family and somebody is in a leadership role in that leadership role is based on the fact that they gave birth and raised you, right? Not that they're in control over you, not that there's some out here person in control over your parents, right? But they gave birth and they raised you, and so you give them the respect. They're still giving you that respect in turn, and everybody has a different choice level, right? And I did specify when I said it outside of family. So outside of matriarchy and patriarchy, no, there are no leadership roles such as kings or queens. There are no leadership roles such as chiefs that you can see. Actually, I said humans don't exist outside of nature. That was the whole point. You missed the whole point, dirty nose ring. You missed the whole point of what I said. I specifically stated no species speciates within a vacuum, and that the idea that we are set above nature and we exist outside of nature, or that nature was a gift to us, is ridiculous. It's blind, because no species can be created in a vacuum. And how would you think that we're set above, right? Societal structure is different than leadership and different than rulership. Many societies structure without leaders at all. There are many indigenous groups of people who did not actually have leaders. There are to this day groups of people who do not actually have leaders. When there is need for people to interact or speak with the words of a nation or a group, the nation or a group will convene to decide who does that. And then that person goes to speak with the words of the nation instead of speaking with their own words, right? I would argue what you think is successful is not successful. Killing your own species off is not successful. It's a fantasy if you think it is. If you think that being the only species in the history of this planet to cause their own mass extinction is success, I would invite you to go back to school and also read the definition of success. We can see that biologically, if the reason for humanity is propagation of species, the propagation of species doesn't happen with the way that people think it happens on a biological level. And so if all it is propagation of species, we have to understand that propagation of species for Homo sapien is unique. So we are unique of all the species on the planet in a few things. Adapting our adaptations was one of them. There are two other things that we're unique. No other species on this planet has these things. Again, this doesn't set us apart from nature because we were created by nature to fulfill a niche within the biome. What this does, though, is make us unique in the way that we fulfill our niche because our niche is unique. So, and we're not the only ones who ever filled that niche. The Neanderthal did, the Denisovan did, the Erectus did, like all the other species of human out there. This is human. Yet for us, we have a couple of different biological factors. The first one is that we have mandatory midwifery. Mandatory midwifery is based on the fact that for us to give birth to a child with the shape in the shoulder, the shape of the head and the shape of the shoulders and the shape of the pelvic outlet, the child actually has to go through two turns. It starts with its nose facing backwards, right? So here's the pelvic outlet like this. Here's the child's head. The child has to turn a quarter of a turn so that their nose is facing sideways so that they can come out the pelvic outlet. Now we're here at the pelvic outlet at the neck, right? This very tiny thing. And our head has gone out. Now we must get our shoulders out because they're so wide and they're sitting in there, right? So now we have to do another turn, another quarter of a turn so that we can get the shoulders out. So infants are born with their nose facing upwards. Now every other species every other species of mammal that nurses like that I think it's every other species of primate actually will pull their children out. Their infants are so small compared to their very round pelvic outlet, they can pull them straight up and they're born facing nose up, but we're start facing nose back. And we have to be turned those two quarter turns to get our head and our shoulders through the pelvic outlet to come out. The only other species that we see that has had to do this is the Neanderthal. Neanderthal had to have mandatory midwifery as well. This means that we had to have community. Both us and Neanderthal must have community for species survival. Somebody who knows how to help us give birth must help us give birth. This means we must have somebody else there. Okay. So the next thing that we see when it comes to our propagation of our species to our children, we are the only species that has 25 years or 5 life stages from neonate to adult. Now that 25 years is current. 100,000 years ago, it might have been 15 years, right? But we are the only species that has 5 life stages from neonate to adult. Most other species are pretty much like 2, like newborn, able to run, right? Most other species, their life stages are under 3, right? Neanderthal had 4 life stages, or the next highest. And we see that These 5 life stages from neonate to adult are very much about the way that our brain develops. Okay. And again, this is neonate to adult. So from the moment you're born to the moment you're considered fully adult. Okay. Not the moment of sexual maturity, and nothing after adulthood, right? So adulthood and post adulthood, like postmenopausal, these things do not count in it. We have 5 life stages from neonate to the brain is fully formed and we are functionally viable to live on our own independently. Okay. So when we are looking at this, we see that these 5 life stages are all about brain development. Snakes are born and they're free. They go, right? Horses are 2 years, right? Full bone growth, maybe 3 years. Bonobos are the next longest from neonate to fully functioning adult, and that's 8 years. Elephants are after that, and that's 5 years. We take 2 years to get to the point that we can walk, that we can move on our own, right? We take another, 2 to 3 years to the point that we're able to like maybe get ourselves the simplest of food and know not to eat the poisonous berries. Maybe, right? We have these extended periods of information gathering in our brain. These extended periods of information gathering. This is why we think our brains are so malleable and able to understand, and why even after our fully formed adult moment comes, our brains are still able to adapt and change and grow because we have these extensive periods of nurturing of brain development through an extended length of time compared to any other species on this planet. This means that we have to nurture. Our children can't get to the point that they're able to live on their own and propagate our species again without being nurtured. In a time period of our species development, that nurture must be by at least 30 people to take one person from neonate to adulthood, which is why I state that absolutely we have a self-regulation of our births, right? We also have this need to have an entire community to raise this child. You're not going to have children close together because having 5 screaming toddlers in a band of 30 fucking people means that you're dead. That's an alert system for every predator within 100 miles, right? You're not going to have 5 screaming toddlers because that takes half of your band of 30 to keep eye on 5 screaming toddlers so they don't fall in the fire, fall down the creek, and drown themselves, get bit by a snake, get stuck in the raspberry bushes, and to teach each one of those toddlers. So you're going to space out your community's births. Now, medicine predates us, really. And our use of medicine is after Neanderthals' use of medicine. So when we're looking at this usage of medicine, the first things that we're using are herbs. And the first herbs that we're using really have a lot to do with maintaining health and preventing pregnancy. So we've been using herbs to prevent pregnancy for 50, 60,000 years. Okay. Before that, you're going to find that nursing will prevent pregnancy, especially if you are only nursing, right? If they're not, you're just nursing a little bit, right? And you're also going to find understanding of cycling, right? No, we're talking about start a species and species purpose. So to take a child from neonate to adult in a time frame where our species is, starting up, right? Where we're not at this point, right? Takes at least 30 people. At this point, it still takes several people. Even as a single parent, you still need the grocer, right? So that you can go down to the grocery and there's 5 or 10 people at least that are maintaining that shit. And then you still need your babysitter, right? You still need whoever's employing you in today's world, right? And that's even if you're doing it at bare base minimum and it's only you, right? So we still need a lot of people today as a single parent. Yeah, if we're looking at community raising a child at 40, 50, 60, 20,000 years ago, what we're looking at is the need of multiple people in that community to make sure that all the needs of that child are met. All the needs of that child that are met are, you need to feed that child, you need to clothe that child, you need to make sure that that child is safe and warm and not too warm at all times. So you need to have somebody who is keeping an eye on that child all the time. Now, if the mother is a hunter, which studies have proven that women are hunting as much as men are in hunter-gatherer societies, and that there is less gathering and more hunting being done. And you absolutely are going to use everybody who has the capability to hunt so that you can subsist. So if you have taken your hunter out of rotation because she's the only one that you want to take care of your child, then you're down possibly actually getting food for your people. So you are most likely going to use somebody who is no longer capable of really going out and doing a lot of hunting or gathering. This is where your elders come in, right? This is why we have elders. We have people whose value to society is in the things that they know because they've lived long enough to learn these things, and in their kindness and in their love of the children and in their ability to maintain space and safety, right? So you might have somebody that the only thing that they're doing is tending the fire and taking care of the children in the cave, right? And your children might be a 1 year old and a 5 year old and a 15-year old, right? But the 15-year old's probably out hunting. Maybe you've got a 9 year old in there too, right? And they're not quite ready to go out hunting. So you're going to be doing something else with them, right? So as you're providing this, now you can absolutely be working on food or keeping the fire, but the likelihood is that at least one of those children is going to be running at all time, and so you definitely have to be taking it to the next space, right? You definitely have to have more people within there. You're going to have people who are gathering things to make baskets, things to make clothing, things to feed that aren't meat. Though we have also shown that meat provides all the necessity that we need if you use the rudiment within the stomach of the herbivores that you kill. So when we're looking at this, we're seeing that you need a village to raise a child. And that the village to raise the child thought process doesn't mean all women. It means all the village. It doesn't matter who you are. If you enjoy hunting, you should teach the child to hunt. It doesn't matter who you are. If flint napping is your skill, you teach the child to flint nap. It doesn't matter who you are. If sewing is your skill and clothing making is your skill, then you teach the child that. And whatever piques the child's interest is the skills that you teach more of. The rudiment is the stomach contents of herbivores, so the greens within their stomach. And there's still areas actually where we eat the rudiment within the stomach. It's a Arctic region thing as well, because there's like not a lot of vegetation in the Arctic. A desert region thing as well, because there's not a lot of vegetation there. Yet if you eat the stomach contents of an herbivore, what's in the stomach contents has been processed by the gases and stuff within the stomach, and it will provide the vegetative nutrients that humans need, because we're omnivores. So we must have meat and we must have vegetable. We must have products from both plant and animal to subsist. And so you can actually live in areas that do not have vegetation that you can find or process by eating the rudiments of the herbivore animals within that region, because they will have dug down, they will have gotten some of that vegetative content. Sure, like sauerkraut. I mean, that's kind of a processing way, right? Like sauerkraut is definitely one of those things where they take something and then they process it and make it more digestible, really, or preserve it, right? So I would state it probably. I mean, I don't know what it tastes like, and I'm not sure how they were cooking it. You could probably make a really good stew with that and some meat or something. I'm not sure how, but it is what they've proven. It's actually part of the proof that women were actually hunting as much as men were hunting, right? Is the fact that there's not a lot of need for gather. I would think myself that there is still the need to gather things to make other tools and make other things happen as children. Yeah, I think that those are things that everybody can do, right? I don't really do a whole lot of historical. I do prehistorical. And the reason I do prehistorical is because I did historical for decades. And yet I find that most historical, you can only trust half of it because it's written by sometimes survivors, usually the winners, and usually the aspect that it's written by or aspect that it's written in is not very positive for one group versus the other, right? And so there's a lot of very obvious bias, so you can't really trust what's going on. Though I do know history pretty well. I mean, I studied history before I studied well, I guess side by side, but I thought I'd be a historian for a long time. And historian is one of the things that I consider myself to be. So you need at least 30 people to raise a child to neonate to adult. And it is definitely going to need every single member of that community to nurture that child, because every single member of that community brings valuable information to the table for that child's brain development, right? So biologically, our species propagation is not pump, pump, dump, and walk away. We are not snakes. Biologically, our species propagation means that we must nurture a child from neonate to adult, every single one of us within a community. So we are communal and nurturing. So between the fact that we have mandatory midwifery, which means that somebody must assist us in giving birth to our children, and the fact that we must nurture a child from neonate to adult for an extended period of time compared to any other species on this planet, so that we can have the brains that we do have, we are a nurturing and communal species. Without that nurture and communal from all sides, our species does not thrive. This correlates as well with the studies that we see in infants with failure to thrive in the 50s and 60s, right? That proved that children who are not nurtured fail to thrive, right? This is truth there. Gender roles explain cultures and force behaviors very little about who a person is. Gender roles in themselves are toxic. There are positive embodiments of gender, right? Like sacred masculinity and sacred femininity are very real things. Yet the idea that these are based on roles are very, very false, and very, very toxic. So when we're talking about species propagation and we're talking about the things that we need to propagate our species, which I believe I've laid out logically, and I hope that you can see that what we need to propagate our species is to understand that we're a part of a niche within the environment, right? And to fulfill the niche within the environment so that our species can be safe within that space within the environment. And to have nurture and communal. To have nurture and community, we must have multiple people to raise us, to continue us, to make our species continue. Just one man, one woman, biologically, that's not going to continue the species. It didn't even start the species. We must have multiples, right? So when we're looking at this, these are things that are positive for species and development. These are the things that create development within a species. These are the things that make it easy for a species to develop. They are what are for our species to develop, and they're what we need to healthily continue our species as a whole. Species don't develop with toxic mutations in their adaptation phase, right? Well, in their speciation phase, not adaptation, because we're constantly adapting, but in their speciation phase, right? And the reason is because if you're developing with things that are toxic to the species development, you don't develop, right? Things that are toxic to a species development are infertility, violence, things that cause the end of a species, right? So just like, we don't have a species of mule, we have mules that come from two other species, right? We're not going to develop with species, with things that are toxic to our species innately within us. So things that are toxic to our species come through mutation later on. Right. So the things that we know of today that are, not good for our species today: violence, the different ways that we eat, the heart problems that certain groups have, and by certain groups, I do not mean certain races. Race has been debunked as a theory. It does not exist. It is a colonial construct. And when we look at certain groups and decide that this group is more predisposed to heart disease, we have discovered through science that the reason that that group is more predisposed to heart disease is not their genetic heritage, but where they are redlined to, where they are put into, where they are concentrated at, where they are forced to live. So, not specific races, but specific communities who have been put in spaces where these things mutate within the genetics and create these genetic problems. So, when we're looking, yes, genetics versus eugenics, right? And I do mean in part literal gene mutations. I also mean in part anything that's toxic to development as a species, right? So if it's toxic to the development of a species for children to be exposed, you're not going to find that as a large group, as our species, that we're going to all expose our children, right? That's not going to be the standard praxis, right? If it's toxic to a species, to if all the males of a species kill each other, that species doesn't survive, right? If every time a gorilla sees a female baby, it kills that female baby, that species doesn't survive, right? So um, the different, pretty good, right? The different mutations in thought, some of those mutations in thought have actually led to mutations in genetics, like we were just talking about with like the redlining thought process and, making people, or, like putting everybody on a reservation and bombing them with nukes and testing nukes on the reservation, the mutations that come from the different things that are happening, mutations that come, like there is understanding that there is a gene that will like cause narcissism, like you have to have this gene and have the childhood abuse for narcissism to happen. And the same thing with other things within the dark triad, right? That they come from a genetic mutation. So that genetic mutation can have been caused by extreme trauma that causes genetic mutation, because we now also know that trauma imprints itself, that epigenetics play a part, and that what has happened to your ancestors will affect your body. They'll affect the way that your genes express themselves, right? So I personally believe that that's how that happened. uh Iroquois goddess, which I love that name. I personally believe that the way that this happens is our first god kings that we see narcissism in their narcissistic trauma in their upbringing. And so I believe that that narcissistic trauma created the epigenetic of a narcissism, right? So what I mean is like the trauma that creates narcissism. So when we look at the first written accounts that we have of our earliest kings, all of these are god kings, and all of these kings share a lot of childhood trauma. Uh, Sargon is the one that I can think of off the top of my head. Sargon was put in a basket to float down the river. He was pulled out of the river by, uh, it's a gardener. Uh, so somebody who tends the earth, or somebody who is actually a farmer, because there are actual sustenance farmers at this time, right? Pulled out of the river and taken in by what is titled as a gardener, but the description sounds more sustenance farming, and raised by this man, and raised without a lot, like raised very poor because sustenance farming. So he's raised in as an orphan who's very poor, an abandoned child who's very poor. That childhood abandonment can, I mean, it can twist somebody, like it can cause that issue, right? um and being raised after that childhood abandonment by somebody who is extremely poor, there's a lot of different things that can happen with that. You know, you can have somebody who resents the child's mouth to feed, or you can have somebody who is telling the child, you know, I get to feed you, but you get to work for me. So there's different levels that can happen within this. We see that Sargon believed himself to be the child of a deity, and that's why he was abandoned. He was the child of the goddess of the river, and he was born on, you know, not the right child, and so he was abandoned, and then he was raised by this farmer. So this gave him godlyhood, right? So when you look at that, that is a trauma that is often associated with the cause of narcissism in a person. And you see also a reaction that is typical of people with narcissistic personality disorder, which is the thought process that they are, in fact, set above, better than, and that all of the pain that they've had in their life is because they're better than, and they have to, you know, like you owe them because they're better than, right? It does. And that's what I'm saying is when you're looking at all of the different earliest theories of gods and kings, every single one of them shows some semblance of narcissistic personality disorder. And every single one of them show this belief that they should be worshiped. All of them have this belief that it's okay for them to harm other people or just people if they're God. And all of them have this thought process of belonging and ownership. Belong, like you belong to me, I own you, you owe me, right? And pretty much all of them, if you look to any childhood that's depicted, has an extremely traumatic childhood, right? So when you're looking at it, I personally believe that the reason that narcissistic personality disorder, sociopathy, and uh, Machiavellianism are so prevalent within our society today, or the dark triad is so prevalent within our society today, as I think we bred it into our society. I think we see it in our first kings and gods. And I think everybody was trying to have sex with them because they were in control. And so if I can have a child with a king or the son of a king, then my child will eat when nobody else is eating. And so we kind of brought it into the line of humanity because there is this mutation that exists due to a trauma, and that mutation gets passed down as an epigenetic thought process. Pretty much every single one of us today is descendant from a handful of kings from old. Like anybody who is, unless you have absolutely not a single drop of blood from all of Asia, Europe, and Africa, right? Unless you have not a single drop of blood from one of those regions, you are descended from a king of old that is either named in that has been named, that has been named in some text somewhere. Like, and we see that genetically. Like we see that like Genghis Khan is the ancestor of half of the world. Like I think it's something like, God, the percentage of Genghis Khan's descendants is huge. Uh, uh, Almost everybody from Europe is descended from one or two different kings. Almost everybody is descended from Charlemagne, right? And there are a couple of different kings in Africa. There is I'm wanting to say Nubia, and it's not Nubia, but there is a king in Africa that, you know, half the people are descended from, right? So many of us have blood of kings in our veins because of the fact that the only way to make sure that your children ate was to marry into the upper echelons of society, right? Absolutely, John. Apparently, you're new to my life, but I have spoken frequently in here now, not necessarily Africa and definitely not Australia, right? But people have been in Turtle Island and Nabiyala for 52,000 years. And that's Homo sapien. Homo erectus's descendants were in Turtle Island and Abiyala at least 250,000 years ago. There are finds in Turtle Island that are 250,000 years old. Absolutely. And that's why I stated Europe, Africa, and Asia, right? Um, Indigenous Australians have been there for 70,000 years, right? Those two things predate Europe on any level, right? So, absolutely. Actually, I believe in multi-regional theory because multi-regional theory does not state that Homo sapiens did not develop and speciate in Africa. It states that other species speciate across the globe, and it is proven in our DNA here in Turtle Island when we have a unique species, a ghost species that's seen nowhere else on the planet, just like Australia has a unique species that's seen nowhere else on this planet in their indigenous DNA. I'm Turtle Island indigenous, John. And while I'm teaching what Western civilization has taught us in the past, I don't believe in that. I do believe in science, and I'm trying to teach what science is teaching. Uh, Turtle Island indigenous people had science long before Europeans, when Europeans were ignoring science, right? Science is as indigenous as it gets. Yeah, I am. My partner just woke up. So when we are looking at the speciesization of a species, species don't speciate in toxicity. We're all Homo sapien. We all have different species within us, but we are all Homo sapien. And we have to all be Homo sapien for us to be able to mix as easily as we do. And for anybody who wants to decide that we're not all Homo sapien, I would like to point out the fact that what the Europeans did with race theory was horrific, and race theory has been debunked. If you decide that certain groups are different species of human, Europeans are going to genocide this entire planet with nukes. So please don't. First of all, there's no scientific evidence that supports it. And second of all, doubling down on racism is not acceptable on any level, right? There's a lot of reasons of DNA testing here within the United States. And a lot of it has to do with the genocide against the indigenous people here in the United States or by the United States government. Because of what the different people have done, the different European groups have done with it, right? So giving any control of anything to different European groups is not intelligent to a lot of people. A lot of people feel that way, or at least a lot of people that I've talked to. I'm going to go. My partner did wake up. It's a good place to end, though, really, because it kind of leads into what I usually say at the end of my lives, which is I've just proven to you, actually, or shown you, actually, why we're all nurturing and communal as a species. And we've talked a lot today about what the concept of civilization was in a European sense, and how that concept of civilization in a European sense is really screwed up, right? I do believe we all have common ancestors. That doesn't mean that we all descended from the same people, right? And I also, we didn't come from monkeys or apes. We are all animals and we are all primates, right? We are all part of the animal kingdom, right? Part of the plant kingdom, right? But we didn't come from monkeys. We actually came from Homo erectus, which is kind of the grandfather of all of us, right? Including the other species that come from different spaces. So, do we as sapiens all have a common origin? We all have a common origin. That common origin, though, actually comes from several different groups converging. So, that common origin is an extremely diffuse common origin, right? But we are absolutely all one species. So, we as a species are nurturing and communal, and this is important to us for our species health. And we are currently living in a society in a time that teaches us that being nurturing and communal is bad. that gaslighting that we were talking about, this gaslighting into this thought process that there is something wrong with you if you're actually taking care of the other people of your community and giving to the other people of your community, correct? So when we are looking at the concepts that are being taught to us, well, the innate need that we have is nurturing community. We can see where in a very sick society, those who are healthy's response is going to be depression, anxiety, disillusionment, this feeling of what the fuck is wrong, this I might be the problem, many different levels of mental health issues that are a direct response to an unhealthy society, right? They're a healthy and natural response to an unhealthy space, right? So when we are sitting here having depression, anxiety, when we are overwhelmed, when we think that we're the problem, when we think that um, we can do nothing, there's nothing we can do anyways, right? This is all untrue. You are worthy just by breathing, as we were talking about all this live. You are worthy just by breathing. You are worthy just by existing, because just by existing, you provide nurture and community to the community around you. Everybody is necessary in a community when community is necessary. So you are worthy just by breathing. You are worthy just by being, right? The depression and the anxiety that you feel is a healthy response. Give yourself grace for that healthy response. That's not true, Onokomi. So, when you're having a healthy response to an unhealthy society, you need to give yourself grace in having that response. If you are watching the world burn and you're not feeling sad for the people around you, you might need to go to a counselor, right? There might be something wrong with you. But if your compassion and your empathy is showing through and your depression is great and you feel like you can't do anything to change it and you're overwhelmed, you are who is necessary to affect change, because it is only by seeing, opening our eyes, knowing what is going on, that we can actually affect the change that is needed across the globe at this point of time. How do we affect that change? There are several different ways, I'm sure. The one that I see clearly is land back on a global scale, returning tending and governance to Indigenous communities on a global scale. This does not mean pack up your shit and get out. I've never met a person who was going for land back who thought that. What it means is the way that the land is tended, the way that the community is put in space, the way that it all interacts is returned to an animistic thought process and the indigenous groups of the area that know how to do this, because this land is the land that they've adapted to, and this land is the land that they've been a part of. Whether that land is here in Turtle Island or in Scandinavia or in Japan or in any of the countries in Africa or in the Middle East or in the Balkans, no matter where this land is, there are still indigenous groups that can help with the understanding of how the land needs to be tended and governed, right? And we do that not by deciding how to do it. We do it by talking to indigenous groups and asking them what they need to achieve that goal. I have these skills. How can I help you achieve this goal? And by giving yourself grace, by understanding that you are necessary and a value member of society, that you are necessary and valued just by breathing. Now, I do want to point out that absolutely those who are able to, do things. No, that's not the way I want to phrase that. Just by breathing, you are necessary to our continuation. If your breathing does not interact and give safety and love and stability to the community as a whole, then you are still worthy because you are alive. Yet you might find that you're not feeling any better because it is by interaction and the performance of community, right, that we actually find our feeling of worth. Again, not through being exploited, but through seeing the smile on somebody's face or watching something happen. This is why when we give gifts, we feel great joy at the receiver's joy, because that's community, right? Um, Only because there was a couple comments today, and that is an excellent point that absolutely you are worthy just by breathing. You'll feel better if you're contributing, right? You can breathe and tend the fire and be worthy as hell. But if you are isolating yourself from community, you're not a member of community. You're still worthy of life. You do not have to prove to anybody. You might find yourself feeling just as sad and just as lonely. And that's the thing. Art is such a beautiful thing. Talking to people, sitting together. You don't, if you're sitting here and I'm cleaning my house and you're talking to me while I'm cleaning my house, I'm happier. I'm cleaning my house. I get community, I get conversation, right? Like, you don't have to be doing anything but running your gums, right? You don't have to be doing anything but seeing me, right? Like, if you're distancing yourself, you're still worthy of life, right? You're still worthy, but you're not being a part of community. So how can community value you if you're not even there, right? It does not mean that your worth, the base worth of humanity, is any less for you, right? Um, with that, though, I am going to go ahead and go. I want everybody to please grant themselves grace today, right? Grant themselves love. Remember your worth. And remember, your worth is not based on what you can be exploited for, but on what you enjoy and just by living and being, right? And remember, we have to change the way we think on a global scale, and only those who can understand that we have to change the way we think can help make us change the way we think. And only through kindness and compassion, only through stating things in as clear and concise a manner as you possibly can, and doing it with love in your words and in your thought process, right? And it is hard, don't get me wrong. Sometimes I want to smack a bitch, yet we must, because it is the only way that we can get people to actually hear, right? And the only way to make these changes is if we get people to actually hear, and we can return ourselves to a pre 10,000-year-old thought process. Much love, everybody. Take care today. Free Palestine. Stop the genocide and free Palestine. Much love to everybody. Bye.